beach and decided to see where it leads. But when he pulled it and saw what was hidden underwater, what he uncovered was something he should have never seen. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. The sun had long since dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind only the warm afterglow that clung to the sky like fade-in embers. The beach had emptied hours ago, the tourists and sunbathers gone, retreating back to their hotels and homes as the evening breeze swept over the coastline. Now, the shoreline belonged to the waves and the moonlight, and to a man walking alone along the soft, cool sand. Michael Jones breathed in the salty air as if trying to draw calmness into his restless heart. The rhythm of the ocean was usually enough to quiet the noise inside his mind, but tonight it struggled to compete. His thoughts drifted, as they so often did, to places he wished they wouldn't. The distant echo of alarms on a stormy night, the roar of breaking waves slamming against steel hull, the cries over the radio for help that never came. He could still see the helplessness in his friend's eyes during that final rescue attempt, the moment when the sea claimed him and left nothing but regret in its wake. He'd left the Navy after that, walked away from a life of purpose and adrenaline, and traded it for a small beach town where no one knew his failures. Now, he spent his days watching the ocean from a rescue tower, keeping strangers safe while battling a storm that never stopped within himself. He convinced everyone that this was a fresh start, that this was the peace he needed. But the truth was that every time he looked at the water, he saw a ghost staring back from the waves. He shoved his hands deeper into the pockets of his windbreaker as he walked along the quiet beach. His boots left deep footprints behind him, quickly softened by the tide. The moon cast a trail of light across the churning surface of the water, as though inviting him to follow. He ignored it. His gaze drifted to the shoreline, absent and wandering, until something caught his attention. It was subtle, a small imperfection on the otherwise smooth stretch of sand. He slowed, peering ahead. At first, he thought it might be sea turtles. Sometimes in the late evenings they crawled ashore to make their nests. But this was different. The sand looked disturbed, as if someone had been digging. Not deeply, just enough to leave the surface uneven. He crouched, letting grains of sand sift through his fingers as he brushed away the top layer. The texture was firmer beneath, packed unnaturally tight. Someone had definitely been here. But why? This section of the beach wasn't visited often. It was far from the hotels and rarely patrolled. He would know. He patrolled it every day. He looked around. The night was quiet. The closest sign of life was a distant pier, tiny lights flickering faintly in the dark. No footsteps, no stray equipment, just this one curious disturbance. Curiosity overrode caution. He dug a little more, using his hand like a small shovel. The sand clung to his fingertips, cold against his skin. It didn't take long before his fingers met something solid. Not rock, not wood, something smooth and synthetic. He scraped faster, clearing away more sand. A long, thick black shape emerged, round, coated in layers of rubber-like insulation. For a moment, he stared at it in disbelief. A cable, a massive one, easily as thick as his wrist. He followed its length with his eyes. One direction led closer to the dunes, then disappeared beneath the sand. The other went straight toward the dark water, vanishing beneath the gentle pull of the tide. Michael touched the cable. It was cold and slick, coated with seawater and sand. Industrial grade, not something discarded by fishermen. He'd seen cables like this before during underwater missions, cables used for secure communications or transferring specialized signals. Definitely not something that belonged on a leisure beach. He should have walked away. Report it to the Coast Guard. Let someone else deal with it. But the years at sea had built instincts he couldn't turn off. Any irregularity in the water or on the coast was a potential threat, until proven otherwise. Besides, something about the uneasiness in his chest told him that this wasn't just a forgotten piece of equipment. He braced his feet against the wet sand and wrapped both hands around the cable. It didn't budge at first. He leaned back, using his weight, and pulled harder. It shifted slightly beneath the sand. His pulse quickened, not out of exertion, but anticipation. It wasn't anchored to the seabed. It was attached to something. The cable gave again, and this time he nearly lost his balance as it surged forward a few inches. The waves rolled in as though trying to swallow the secret before he revealed it. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. Pulling became a rhythm. Sand scraped under his boots as he dug them deeper for leverage. The ocean seemed to resist his efforts, the pull of the tide fighting him. Still, he yanked with determination until the tension suddenly changed. No longer buried in the sand, but heavier, much heavier. And then, rising from the water like a creature resurfacing from a grave, a metallic corner broke the surface. Michael paused, chest heaving. He stared as the waves washed over and retreated again, revealing more. A large, rectangular metal case, about the size of a storage trunk, was tethered to the end of the cable. What little paint remained was dark and chipped, exposing thick steel underneath. The handles were reinforced, military style. There were latches, sealed tight as though protecting something valuable from the sea. Not long forgotten. Recently placed. He pulled again, dragging the case fully onto the sand where the tide couldn't reach it. The weight of the thing boggled him. Whatever was inside was dense, packed tightly and heavy. His heart beat faster. Was it some kind of coastal infrastructure equipment? An experimental device? An illegal dump? But if that were the case, why bury it so shallow? Why in a place where it could eventually be uncovered? He knelt beside the container, running his hand over the rough metal. Then he noticed it, just barely noticeable in the moonlight. A tiny, blinking red light near one of the latches. Almost hidden. His stomach tightened as realization hit. A tracker, or worse, an alarm. Someone somewhere now knew this case had been disturbed. For the first time tonight, he hesitated deliberately. This was no longer just curiosity. It was danger. Every instinct sharpened. He scanned the darkness, senses alert. The shoreline seemed to shrink around him, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Yet the temptation was impossible to ignore. He grabbed the nearest latch and pulled. It didn't move. Instead, he retrieved his multi-tool, flicking out a small pry bar and wedging it beneath the metal lock. With a grunt, he forced it loose. It snapped with a sharp crack that felt far too loud in the quiet night. He flinched, glancing over his shoulder at the beach behind him. Still silent. He opened the lid. Inside were stacks of vacuum-sealed bricks of crisp U.S. $100 bills. Not thousands, millions. Bundled neatly in rows like a bank vault tucked inside a steel casket. Alongside them were several black hard cases, brushed in oil to keep away corrosion. He reached for the nearest one, flipped the clips, and inside lay a compact pistol wrapped in protective cloth, magazines loaded and taped together for quick reload, weapons, money, and beneath them, a folder. It contained multiple passports, dozens, different names, different nationalities, different faces, but the same man, the same eyes staring back in subtly altered disguises. High-level forgery, clean, professional, the sort of documents used by people who vanished often. Cartel. The word flashed in his mind like lightning. This wasn't a lost treasure of some smuggler. It was part of an ongoing operation. A living, breathing criminal network had buried this here, fully expecting to retrieve it. And now, because he'd touched it, because he'd opened it, he was part of that secret. His mouth felt dry. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then something shifted behind him. He shot upright, spinning around. His eyes scanned the dunes and rocks. The moonlight flickered across something near the cliffside. A reflection? A glint? Maybe a lens. He stood frozen, every muscle coiled. The case sat open at his feet like a screaming confession, the red light still blinking. He forced himself to shut the lid and drag the heavy container closer to the dunes, attempting to conceal it behind a cluster of rocks. The ocean roared louder, as if warning him that he was trespassing where he shouldn't. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold. Someone knew. He was almost certain of it. He hurried away from the shore, glancing back repeatedly as though expecting someone to emerge from the dark water. His footsteps were hurried, sand kicking up beneath his boots. The wind pushed at his back, like it too wanted him gone. By the time he reached his truck, he was sweating through his shirt despite the cool night. He unlocked the door with trembling hands, threw the vehicle into gear, and drove away without daring to look in the rearview mirror. As the tires rolled over the cracked pavement leading home, his pulse refused to slow. Images flashed repeatedly in his mind. The cable slithering into the sea, the blinking red eye in the case, the stacks of money that spelled danger more than fortune. He had accidentally unearthed something meant to stay hidden, something someone would certainly come back for. The ocean no longer felt like his refuge. Now it felt like a predator, watching. Michael realized one thing with stark clarity. Tonight was only the beginning. Michael barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of that blinking red light returned, pulsing like a heartbeat, a warning that something unseen was watching. He lay awake, listening to the quiet groan of his small beach house, the sigh of palm fronds brushing against the windows, and the distant thunder of waves. Sounds that once comforted him now only reminded him of the secret nestled in his storage shed out back. He tried to convince himself that he was overthinking everything, that no one had seen him, that perhaps the blinking was nothing more than a low battery indicator. But even as his thoughts tried to soothe, his instincts screamed the opposite. Years in service had sharpened his gut into a tool more reliable than logic. Danger was close, and getting closer. By dawn, he gave up on sleep entirely. He stepped into the shower, letting hot water run over skin still tense with adrenaline. His reflection in the fogged mirror looked older than he remembered, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, jaw clenched, shoulders stiff. The man staring back didn't just look afraid. He looked hunted. He needed to think, to plan. But first, he needed to appear normal. Routine would keep him hidden, at least for now. He drove to the lifeguard station as he always did, sipping stale coffee and forcing himself to look calm. But his gaze kept sliding toward the sea as if expecting the ocean to rise up and demand its stolen prize. The other lifeguards chatted casually, unaware of the storm building inside his mind. When one of them joked about his tired appearance, asking if he had been partying, Michael forced a weak smile and waved it off. He couldn't let even a hint of the truth slip, not until he understood what he was up against. While scanning the shoreline from the tower, he heard a faint buzzing sound. At first, he thought it was tinnitus brought on by stress, but then it grew sharper, more mechanical. He squinted into the sky. A tiny black shape moved against the pale blue backdrop, hovering in slow, deliberate patterns over the coastline. A drone, high-end, long-range, not a hobbyist toy. It wasn't scanning for sea turtles. His breath caught in his throat. He gripped the railing, knuckles whitening as his heart pounded faster. The drone drifted above the section of beach where he had dug out the cable. Its cameras glinted like insect eyes. After a tense minute, it tilted, banking away, disappearing silently over the water. Michael's fingers trembled around the railing. They were already looking, already searching. The container had clearly been monitored, not just abandoned and forgotten. The moment he'd broken that seal, someone had been alerted. He thought back to the glimmer near the rocks the previous night. That single flash of reflection might not have been his imagination. Someone could have been watching him even then. He finished his shift with the unwilling patience of a man forced to wait for the inevitable. Leaving early would raise suspicion, so he moved through the day mechanically, rescuing a drifting beach ball, warning a reckless teenager not to swim beyond the buoys, returning a lost pair of sunglasses. His actions were automatic, while his mind replayed every detail of last night, trying to piece together what came next. When the sun dipped lower, beginning to surrender the sky to dusk, he decided he had to go back. He needed to know whether the beach still held secrets, or new threats. He told his supervisor he was checking on a hazardous erosion patch, grabbing a flashlight before making his way down the sand. The beach was busier than the night before, but still relatively calm. Families gathered their towels and umbrellas. Couples held hands while strolling near the water's edge. Normalcy. Innocence. All of them blissfully unaware of the silent war beneath their feet. But then he saw it. In the distance, where the water retreated during low tide, dark shapes protruded from beneath the surface. Jagged beams, a slanted deck, a broken railing, rising from the ocean like the ribcage of some ancient beast. He had walked this beach hundreds of times and had never seen anything like that. It must have been hidden underwater for decades, only now revealed by shifts in the tide. His pulse raced. This was where the cable led. He waited for the final beachgoers to leave, then headed toward the wreck. The closer he came, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary debris. The wood was blackened with age, marked with barnacle scars and deep grooves. Seaweed draped the remains like tangled hair. The structure had once been a ship, likely large, with a tall hull and multiple decks. Parts of it had collapsed inward, bowing under centuries of salt and current. Yet enough remained to see its heritage. An old colonial vessel, perhaps Spanish or Portuguese, forgotten by history. The waves lapped against what used to be its side, revealing glints of rusted metal where modern hands had altered ancient craftsmanship. That was the first sign that the wreck hadn't been untouched. The second sign was the cable. It snaked across the sand before disappearing into a dark opening in the ship's tilted frame. Someone had carved out a space within this relic. Someone with resources. Someone who needed secrecy. Michael's skin crawled. The cartel hadn't simply dumped a container here. They were using the wreck as a hidden vault, possibly for multiple caches, possibly for years. He felt the weight of his equipment bag against his shoulder, his presence both reassuring and burdensome. He had grabbed his old diving mask, a pair of fins, and a small flashlight. Just enough for reconnaissance. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed intruder, but he still wasn't fully prepared for the surge of dread that washed over him as he crouched by the barnacled entrance. The ocean reflected the fading sky, casting shifting shadows across the warped wood. The wreck's dark maw felt like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. He hesitated. Memories of cold water and screaming alarms clawed up from the places he tried to bury them. His lungs tightened, breath shallow. His friend's terrified face surfaced in his mind, eyes wide, hand outstretched as the sea dragged him beneath. Michael swallowed hard, fighting back the panic. Shame burned through him. He had run away from the depths once. If he ran again, he would never stop running. He steadied himself with one deep, controlled breath. The ocean hadn't taken his courage from him. He would not let it. Michael pulled the mask over his face and stepped into the water. The first chill hit his ankles, then his knees. When it reached his chest, his breath shuddered outward, and he forced the fear down where it couldn't control him. With one final glance at the quiet shore, he slipped beneath the surf. The world below transformed instantly. The muffled silence pressed in from all sides, the flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through murky water. The wreck loomed larger here, bulky and monstrous. Algae fluttered like ghostly banners along the fractured hull. Michael's heartbeat filled his ears, loud and insistent. The cable guided him deeper, twisting through crevices built by time and decay. He entered what must have once been a storage bay. The walls were encrusted with barnacles, and the floor was thick with silt that puffed up with every gentle kick of his fins. He hovered in place, examining the environment cautiously. Then he spotted it. A rectangular metallic shape halfway buried under debris. A safe. Definitely not from the 18th century. The cartel's modern signature, hidden inside a skeleton of another age. Michael marked its location in his mind, checking the oxygen level even though he wasn't using a tank tonight. Just a short dive, nothing deeper than a breath could handle. He resurfaced without trouble, the air welcoming and sharp in his lungs. The wind ruffled his hair as he looked back toward town. Lights twinkled from the houses, but the peaceful scenery offered no comfort. He had confirmed enough. There was more beneath that wreck than time-worn wood and forgotten history. He would need real diving gear, real tools, and far more caution. He trudged back toward the main road, dripping and tense. He needed to get the safe out of there. And soon. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that the cartel knew their property had been discovered. As he reached the edge of the dunes, headlights swept across him. He froze instinctively. A black SUV rolled slowly down the beachfront path, windows tinted dark as night. It stopped just 15 feet from him. The door opened with a soft click. Two men stepped out. Both were tall, unfamiliar, wearing casual clothes that couldn't hide the sharpness in their posture. Predators disguised in ordinary skin. One man smiled without warmth. "Evening," he said, voice smooth but dangerous. "We're looking for someone who might have seen something unusual last night." Michael's pulse hammered against his ribs. He forced his expression neutral. Beach is full of unusual things. Tide brings in all sorts of junk. "That's so?" The man's stare sharpened, lingering on Michael's damp clothes. "You look like you've been swimming this late, brave man." Michael shrugged, though his jaw tightened. "I live here. Water's nothing new." The man's partner stepped closer, gaze unblinking. "You didn't happen to find anything washed up? A piece of equipment, maybe? Anything out of place?" "No," Michael lied evenly. "Just trash and kelp." A long moment passed. The first man scraped his boot across the sand, studying Michael's eyes like he could peel away the truth layer by layer. "Well," he finally said, tone deceptively friendly, "if you do find something, anything, you let us know. We'd hate for someone to get hurt over a misunderstanding." The way he said it made the air turn colder. The men returned to their vehicle, but before Michael could exhale, the first one called over his shoulder, "We'll be around. Beaches are unpredictable places at night." The SUV purred away, disappearing like a shadow swallowed by deeper darkness. Michael stood rooted in place until the last glimmer of taillights vanished. Only then did he allow himself to release the breath he'd been holding. His hands twitched slightly, a tremor of adrenaline and raw fear. They knew, or at least they suspected. The calm facade of his life had cracked, revealing the peril seething beneath. He hurried home, checking every corner with growing paranoia. He reinforced the lock on his shed and covered the container once more, layering tarps and spare equipment to obscure its shape. His mind raced through possible options, each more desperate than the last. Reporting to police felt like suicide. Cartels had ways of knowing things they shouldn't. Keeping everything for himself was worse. He wasn't a criminal, but doing nothing meant waiting for the inevitable knock on his door. Only one path made sense. Dig deeper. Understand the purpose behind the cable, the wreck, the safe. Understand the operation so he could dismantle it before it dismantled him. Hours later, as he sat alone, scanning digital charts of the coastline and comparing them to the ancient map etched in his memory, the buzzing returned. Not mechanical this time, but mental, an awakening, a shift. The question that had chased him all day now bared its teeth. How many more weapons and caches lay hidden beneath that cursed ship? The answer wouldn't be pleasant, but it was his only chance. Because if he didn't uncover the full truth soon, men like those in the black SUV would do it for him, and they would bury him with it. The ocean still roared beyond his window, but its voice no longer held peace or sorrow. Tonight, it whispered a threat. Danger is coming. Morning came slowly, dragging light across the town as if reluctant to disturb the fragile calm that had settled during the night. But calm was a lie now. Michael felt it, a pressure beneath the surface of everyday life, a storm brewing beneath the language of smiles and casual greetings. People passed by him on the sidewalk, unaware that beneath their feet, beneath the steady beat of the ocean tide, secrets older than memory and far more dangerous waited to rise again. The sun had only just crested beyond the horizon when Michael stood once more at the edge of the beach, this time equipped with real diving gear. His wetsuit felt snug and suffocating in the chill morning air, but once he would be underwater, it would help hold his nerves together. The smell of salt and seaweed filled the air, grounding him in the moment. He wished he could pretend the danger was imagined, that his life had not suddenly veered into the shadows of a criminal empire. But there was no returning to ignorance, not after what he had found, not after the SUV and the unspoken threats. He strapped the air tank securely to his back, checked the regulator, and turned his gaze toward the wreck. The tide had receded once more, exposing the twisted wood and jagged metal that had become an unintentional grave marker. From a distance, it looked harmless, just another relic surrendered by the sea. But he knew better now. The wreck was a mouth hiding teeth. His heart hammered against his ribcage as he approached the waterline. He tried to steady himself, reminding his lungs to breathe evenly, deeply, something that always became a challenge when he faced the depths. Every instinct screamed that the ocean had already taken enough from him, but he clenched his jaw, setting his will like an anchor. If he didn't dive now, fear would claim the ground he had regained. He put the regulator between his teeth, tasted rubber and stale air, and stepped into the waves. The ocean embraced him grudgingly, the initial shock of cold cutting straight to his bones. He forced himself to move, waiting until the ground fell away beneath his feet. He kicked downward, letting the water swallow him whole. Below the surface, the world changed. Light shimmered through the waves like fractured glass. The wreck appeared slow and monstrous as he drew nearer, its silhouette stretching across the seafloor like the remains of some colossal sea creature. Through the haze of sediment and shadows, he could still make out the cable's path leading into the belly of the ship. He gripped the beam he had used as a guide the night before and followed the cable into the yawning crack in the hull. Once inside, darkness wrapped around him, pierced only by the cone of his flashlight. Suspended particles danced in the beam, swirling like disturbed phantoms. His pulse quickened, roaring in his ears. Still, he pushed forward. This time he came prepared to work quickly. Using a diving knife, he carved away clumps of kelp and loosened silt from around the safe. The steel box glinted beneath his light, dull from corrosion but unmistakable in form. Rectangular, bulky, reinforced edges. 18th century wood surrounded it, yet the safe was clearly of modern design. A parasite in a corpse. He looped a rope around the safe's base, securing knots with precision learned long ago. His muscles burned as he tugged it free, disturbing a cloud of muck that momentarily blinded him. Heart in his throat, he kicked upward and guided the rope out through the opening. Breaking the surface felt like inhaling life itself. He dragged the line along the beach, hauling the safe inch by agonizing inch until it reached the shallows where he could move it by hand. Once he had the box on the sand, he collapsed beside it, chest heaving. He stared up at the sky, its pale morning glow offering no comfort. Every action now felt irreversible, like each decision locked another door behind him. His old life had ended the moment his fingers brushed that cable. The safe looked innocent enough lying there, covered in damp patches of sand. But Michael knew danger lived within its walls. Danger and answers. He needed both. With a grunt, he hoisted the safe onto a handcart he had stashed nearby and wheeled it back toward his house, straining under the weight but too determined to stop. Once inside his shed, he shut the door and locked it twice. The morning sun streamed through the small window, casting beams of light across the safe. It seemed to glow in the dim, dust-filled air, like a treasure box from a forgotten legend. The sight stirred something buried deep in him, a childhood curiosity, a longing for adventure. But adulthood had taught him a harsher truth. Curiosity came with costs. He fetched his pry bar and an old angle grinder. Sparks flared as metal ground against metal, shrieking through the quiet morning air. He worked with urgency, each ignition of heat-producing paranoia that someone outside would hear. In his head, he replayed the shadows near the beach, the drone circling overhead, the men in the SUV. Every sound outside made him pause, breath held, poised to fight or flee. When the final lock gave, a sharp ping echoed through the small space. Michael dropped the tools, wiping sweat and sand from his brow. For a moment, he simply stared. The air felt charged, as if whatever lay inside the safe waited for release. He opened the lid. What he saw silenced the world. Stacks of gold coins, tarnished but still gleaming faintly under the filtered sunlight. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were intricately stamped with crests and royal emblems, artifacts of an empire that had risen and fallen centuries ago, treasure from a time of conquest and blood. Beside the coins was a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and water-stained. The pages inside were yellowed, adorned with a script that curled and sprawled like vines. Spanish. Not unexpected. Michael carefully lifted it, his fingers brushing over delicate memories entrusted to parchment. A diary. A captain's voice frozen in ink. Among the artifacts lay a folded sheet, thicker paper, brittle along the creases, a map. He spread it out, holding his breath as faded ink traced coastlines that were both familiar and new. Small red marks dotted the edges of the land, each accompanied by a symbol. Some were recognizable, a compass, a star. Others were strange, cryptic. This was not just treasure, it was a trail. Michael flipped open the diary. His eyes scanned over the words, fragmented by age but powerful in meaning. We carry not only gold from the new lands, but something cursed by greed and sin. The sea has claimed men for centuries, yet even the waves recoil from this burden. The crown demands we return with these spoils, but my soul cries out, we must hide what should never be seen. My crew mutinies against fate. They say death follows us like a raven. I believe they are right. The treasure must not fall into the wrong hands. We seek refuge in waters where no empire maps exist. Michael's pulse raced. These weren't just the ramblings of a weary sea captain. They told a story of betrayal, of fear so potent it drove men to bury gold rather than spend it, to hide treasure rather than claim it. The wreck outside wasn't merely a shipwreck. It was a desperate burial. A line near the end caught his attention. If one day another should find these riches, let them know. The gold is not the only prize. The true secret lies deeper, where light cannot touch and only the brave dare follow. Michael swallowed, throat tight with anticipation and dread. The map had multiple marked locations, more treasures, more secrets, and the cartel was already aware of at least one. He traced one particular mark near the coastline that matched the wreck. Another one lay farther out, perhaps deeper than where he had gone. A place that the diary warned was the gate to ruin. He felt a tremor in his hand as he closed the journal. The enormity of what he had stumbled upon was overwhelming. The cartel may have been using the wreck out of convenience or secrecy, but they had no idea what else was hidden there. Or maybe they did. Maybe that's why they guarded the area so fiercely. He suddenly remembered the fisherman who had gone missing. Had he accidentally crossed into their territory, glimpsed something he shouldn't have? As the sun climbed higher, Michael heard voices outside. Neighbors, a delivery truck passing by. Ordinary life continued unaware, but he understood now that the ground beneath them was ready to erupt. There was no turning back. He would not give the cartel a chance to reclaim these weapons or this gold, and he could not allow something possibly far worse to remain hidden underwater where criminals could unearth it piece by piece. He needed allies, tools, a plan, but the first step was clear. He glanced once more at the map, then at the ocean through his small window. The waves rolled steadily, disguising their darkness behind glimmers of sunlight. The sea had taken much from him. Now it was offering him a path and a purpose. Michael locked the safe behind him and stepped outside into the world, his silhouette bathed in the hot glow of day. Even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something already knew what he had found. He walked toward the beach once more. The ocean was calling him back. The daylight hours passed with the mocking slowness of a nightmare, each second stretching thin until it seemed ready to tear beneath the weight of dread. Michael left the safe and its dangerous revelations locked away in the shed, but his mind never left it, not for a heartbeat. He carried the captain's diary and map inside his house, unable to bring himself to leave them unattended even for a moment. They lay open on the dining table, soaking up the morning light like relics brought back from the underworld. The gold coins glinted from within the safe as if calling on him to claim riches beyond imagination. But Michael knew better. Treasure always came with a price, and this price had teeth. He tried to convince himself he could take a small step back into normalcy, clinging to the remnants of his routine as if they might shield him. He showered, changed clothes, poured himself coffee, and tried to eat breakfast. But each action felt hollow, mechanical. The walls of his home felt thinner than ever, as though any intrusion could shatter this fragile shelter and expose him entirely. He caught himself flinching at the rumble of distant traffic or the creak of a settling floorboard. There was no peace in pretending. Still, he had to work. He couldn't suddenly vanish from his post. Doing so would draw attention. The cartel men had already marked him. Every misstep would tighten their focus. Walking along the beach toward the lifeguard tower, Michael scanned every face in the growing morning crowd. Most were vacationers, sun-hungry and smiling, their concerns no heavier than which cocktail to order at lunch. They lounged on colorful towels or splashed in the shallows. None of them looked like assassins, but that meant nothing. Danger didn't always look like danger. The air was warmer now, the sun beating down in earnest, waves glittering under its command. But beneath that brightness, Michael felt the undertow of menace. The ocean was too calm, the world too quiet. He climbed the tower steps and looked out across the water. It appeared serene. Washed clean by the early tide, the wreck submerged once more beneath the shifting currents. The secrets it hid were invisible again, but their presence weighed on him heavier than the tank he'd carried hours earlier. Halfway through his shift, a radio call pulled him from his thoughts. Only static at first, then a sharp, crackling voice. "Tower 3, come in. You seen this?" Michael pressed the button. "Seeing what?" "Look to your 2 o'clock." He turned his head slowly. There, a sleek black speedboat skimmed the surface not far beyond the breakers, circling back toward deeper water with deliberate, predatory grace. It was too large, too fast, too wrong for this part of the beach. No fishing lines, no diving flags, not a pleasure craft. It lingered just long enough for its silhouette to etch itself into memory before streaking off toward the horizon. Cartel reconnaissance. They were mapping their territory. Perhaps they already knew something had been disturbed beneath the waves. Perhaps they were waiting for the intruder to expose himself. The radio crackled again. "Coast Guard's been notified. Probably drug runners. Just keep your eyes sharp." Michael clicked the radio off and forced his breath to stay steady. He prayed the others didn't notice his reaction, the tension gripping his spine. As quiet returned to the tower, he swallowed the rising panic. The cartel wasn't guessing anymore, they were confirming. The rest of his shift felt like walking on a tightrope strung above an abyss. By the time he stepped off the tower that afternoon, his nerves were stretched raw. But the moment he thought he might finally escape home unnoticed, fate intervened. A black SUV turned onto the beach access road. Same model, same tinted windows, same slow, predatory roll. Michael veered toward the lifeguard station building, hoping to avoid confrontation, hoping the vehicle would continue on. But as he turned, he saw 2 men step from the shadows beside the station. The same men from before. One wore a polite smirk that curdled Michael's stomach. "Hey there, hero," the man said, voice dripping with false casualness. "We missed you last night." Michael didn't answer. He tried to move past them, pulse pounding hard enough to blur his vision. But one of them shifted, blocking his path. The other stepped closer until there was barely room to breathe. "You didn't call us like we asked," the first man murmured. "We don't like being ignored." Michael clenched his fist but forced his expression blank. "I told you, I didn't find anything." The second man chuckled darkly. "Funny, our equipment says something different." Michael's heart froze. They had telemetry, tracking, maybe cameras. They knew he had dragged the container inland. The man leaned close, breath sour, voice intimate and vile. "We'll search this entire beach if we have to, and if we find you lied..." He let the threat hang between them like a knife. Michael squeezed his fist tighter, nails digging into his palms. His instincts urged him to run, but running would prove guilt. So he stood frozen as the first man lifted his hand and patted Michael's shoulder with chilling cordiality. "We'll be in touch," he said, tone pleasant but eyes dead. "You're a smart guy. Don't make this worse." The men walked away casually, heading toward the SUV. Michael stared after them, unable to move until the vehicle drove off into the gathering dusk. His legs felt like concrete, his lungs burning from holding his breath too long. They were closing in. He stumbled home under the heavy weight of realization. If he didn't outsmart them soon, he would be buried under the wreck as just another vanished fisherman. The setting sun cast long shadows across his yard, and as he crossed toward his home, a sudden rustle sounded to his left. Pain exploded at the back of his head before he could react. The world spun violently, and he dropped to his knees. Darkness rushed in like a wave. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer outside. His wrists were bound behind him. The air was thick with gasoline and dust. His vision swam as he tried to make sense of the dim interior. Rusted pipes, crumbling brick walls. A warehouse. Abandoned, but clearly used often enough. A single bulb swung above him, casting a sickly glow that danced along the floor. 3 men stood nearby. 2 he recognized. The third wore a leather jacket and a face that smiled without kindness. A thin scar traced down his cheek, giving him a permanent sneer. "So," the scarred man said as he crouched down in front of Michael, "you're the one who thinks he can steal from us." Michael forced his gaze level. "I didn't steal anything. I found something washed up on the beach." The man grinned, amused. "The ocean has good taste then, but we keep what's ours. And that case you opened, that's ours." Michael struggled against the ropes, but they only cut deeper into his skin. "I told you, I don't have it." The man sighed as though disappointed by the lack of creativity in the lie. Then he gestured. One of the other men struck Michael across the face, a brutal blow that sent stars bursting behind his eyes. "Let's start again," the scarred man said patiently. "And let's skip the bullshit. We know you took something from us, so you're going to give it back." Michael tasted blood in his mouth. He spat onto the floor. Fear tried to claw its way into his chest, but he shoved it down. He had been through worse than this. He could survive this. The scarred man's grin widened. "I see what kind of man you are." He nodded to one of the thugs. A knife flashed, sharp and hungry for skin. Michael braced himself. Then a sound interrupted, a distant thud, followed by voices from outside. The scarred man stood abruptly. "Check it." One thug exited. The others remained, but their attention flicked to the door. Michael seized that fraction of distraction, shifting his weight, forcing the chair legs against the floor. He rocked backward with all his strength and slammed himself into the ground. The chair shattered beneath him with a crack of splintering wood, and he rolled, twisting his wrists free from the loosened ropes. The thugs lunged, but Michael surged to his feet, fueled by desperation and adrenaline. He grabbed the first object he could reach, a metal pipe lying near a stack of crates, and swung it hard. Bone crunched beneath the impact. The thug crumpled. Michael pivoted, ducked, and jammed the end of the pipe into the second man's ribs. The thug collapsed with a wheeze. The scarred man drew a pistol, but Michael hurled the pipe before he could aim. It struck the man's hand, sending the gun clattering across the floor. Michael sprinted for the door, slamming it open and barreling into the night. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He ran until the warehouse was just a stain on the edge of memory. When he finally reached his house, breath ragged, pain thundering in his skull, he collapsed against the wall. His entire body shook, not from weakness, but from the brutal clarity of what he now understood. There was no safety left. No calm morning. No pretending. The cartel would not rest until they reclaimed what they believed belonged to them. Michael wiped the blood from his mouth, grabbed the map and diary from the table, and stared down at the markings left by the captain's hand centuries ago. His fear dissolved into something sharper, an iron resolve forged by necessity and survival. He could not run. He could not hide. The only way out was through. He would dive deeper, discover more, find the core of the cartel's operation before they swallowed him whole. The sea's whispers sounded louder than before, a roar under the floorboards. And Michael knew where the next descent would take him, straight into the heart of darkness beneath the waves. Night had settled over the shoreline like a heavy shroud, dimming the world to shades of silver and shadow. The moon cast fractured reflections on the restless waves, each glimmer a fragment of light swallowed by the dark waters beyond. Michael stood alone at the edge of the ocean, looking out across the vast expanse that had both cursed and called to him for so many years. His ribs ached from the beating. His head still throbbed where the blow had landed, and dried blood cracked against his skin every time his jaw clenched. But none of it mattered now. Tonight was not about survival. It was about reclaiming his fate from the hands of men who believed they owned him. The wetsuit clung tight to his battered body, the straps of the air tank digging harshly into his shoulders. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. Each breath through the regulator tasted of cold metal and adrenaline. The map lay folded inside a waterproof pouch strapped against his chest. The captain's diary and gold remained hidden back in the shed, locked away from both cartel and temptation. What he carried tonight was purpose and necessity. There would be no backup, no cavalry. The ocean was his ally this time, or it was his grave. He glanced once more over his shoulder. The beach was empty. The lifeguard tower stood silent like a sentinel watching his descent into madness. The wind whispered through the dunes, urging him on. Somewhere beyond sight, a predator would soon realize its prey had escaped the cage. If the cartel discovered he was alive and free, alive and defiant, they would strike without hesitation. He had a narrow window of time, and he knew it. Michael stepped into the surf. The icy water climbed up his calves, his thighs, his waist, until it embraced him fully. The moonlit sky vanished in a ripple of silver as he submerged himself beneath the surface. The world above fell silent. Below, the sea spoke in groans and distant clicks, the ancient language of pressure and depth. He moved carefully, hugging the seabed as he pushed forward into deeper waters. The map guided him. He followed its markings etched into memory, past the point where the old wreck lay hidden, past the shifting sandbars where even fish hesitated to linger. His flashlight pierced the murk ahead like a blade cutting through fog. His brain replayed each marking on the map, counting distances, adjusting direction with subtle kicks of his fins. Then the darkness deepened. The water around him turned colder, pressing in like hands urging him back. But he pressed forward. He had to. He had already gone too far to back out now. When he first saw the shape looming in the gloom, he thought it was another wreck. But the lines were wrong. Too straight, too reinforced. He slowed his propulsion and hovered in place as the structure resolved before him. The hull of an ancient ship, larger and more intact than the first. The iconic curvature of colonial engineering was still visible beneath layers of algae and corrosion. But additions had been made. Modern metal plates welded crudely over the timbers, reinforced compartments, cables running like arteries to unknown destinations. His lungs tightened, not from lack of air, but from awe and dread. This was no relic lost to time. This was an installation, hidden in plain sight, beneath the ocean, beneath history itself. The cartel hadn't stumbled upon treasure. They had claimed it, exploited it, transformed it into an operational outpost. The old captain had tried to bury a curse, but someone had dug it up and strapped their empire to its bones. Michael drifted closer, examining the nearest metal hatch. A dim red light glowed above it, pulsing intermittently, as if the ship itself were breathing. He tested the handle. Locked. But he didn't expect otherwise. He explored further, his flashlight catching glimpses of more modifications. Waterproof doors, electronic housings strapped to corroded wood, a faint hum vibrating through the structure. There were power lines down here, generators. Technology merged with shipwreck like a parasite feeding off a carcass. He circled until he found a small opening. An access hatch left ajar, perhaps for recent use. It exhaled a faint trickle of air bubbles, proof that somewhere inside still existed pockets of breathable atmosphere. He steadied himself and slipped through. The interior was a labyrinth of conflict split between two centuries. Worn beams overhead creaked under the strain of modern metal supports. Water pooled in warped corners, mingling with fuel residue. Crates stacked in rows bore labels in Spanish and coded inventory numbers. The floor vibrated from machines operating beyond sight, low and ominous. He surfaced inside a chamber filled only to waist depth, removing the regulator and switching to slow, silent breathing. Every sound echoed inside the hollow ribs of the ship. The soft drip of condensation, the distant clang of tools striking metal. People were here, working, living, beneath the world's notice. Michael waded forward, eyes flicking across objects that revealed sinister truths, weapon cases, radio interference equipment, chemical containers stored under tarps. He felt like he was walking through the nervous system of something malignant. And he was deep in its core. Footsteps clanged from a passage ahead. Michael ducked behind a crate, submerging his body halfway into the water. Two voices approached, Spanish spoken quietly but urgently. He listened, picking up fragments. A missing package, activated tracker, orders from above. They were talking about him. The case he had opened had triggered a storm he now had to survive. As the men moved past, Michael emerged silently behind them. He watched until they disappeared into a lower chamber, then slipped away in the opposite direction. He needed to accomplish what he came for: sabotage, destruction, ending whatever operations this place supported. He found what he needed soon enough. A room lined with fuel tanks. Pressurized containers stacked 3 high, wiring exposed in dangerously makeshift configurations. A single spark in the right place could turn this ghostly fortress into an underwater volcano. Michael unsheathed the dive knife strapped to his leg. Working quickly yet meticulously, he sliced open a fuel line. Liquid spilled into the water below, creating a shimmering, toxic sheen. He moved to the next tank and cut a deeper slit. The fumes thickened, mingling with the salty air. Using a steel pipe, he pried open a fuse box near the chamber's entrance, revealing a snarl of live wires. He stripped one with the blade, watching sparks jump like angry insects. He set the damaged wire beside the largest fuel puddle. It would take only the slightest disturbance, a surge of current, a triggered alarm, a flicker of lights, for this ship to ignite. But alarms rang out before he was finished. Shouting erupted from the corridor outside, angry and fast. They had discovered something. Perhaps the cut pipes, perhaps a camera feed revealing an intruder. Heavy boots pounded closer, splashing in the shallow water. Michael gripped the pipe like a spear as shadows filled the doorway. 2 armed men lunged into the room, guns raised. He hurled the pipe in a single motion born from training and raw desperation. It struck the nearest man in the face, snapping his head backward. With no time to think, Michael launched himself at the second guard, tackling him into the fuel-soaked water. The firearm discharged, a deafening blast that tore into the air just inches from Michael's head. Metal ricocheted, sparks flew, and fire roared to life. The flame spread instantly, devouring fuel and wires alike. Heat smothered the air, choking and consuming. The explosion that followed was not a single blast but a chain reaction, multiple detonations ripping through the ship's core. The floor lurched beneath Michael as centuries of wood and decades of metal screamed in violent disintegration. He staggered free of the guard, gulping air thick with smoke, and threw himself toward the nearest exit. The hallway twisted in chaos, lights bursting, beams collapsing, torrents of seawater crashing inward through ruptured hull plates. Fire and ocean warred within the ship like 2 titans fighting for dominance. The men behind him shouted orders, but their commands were drowned beneath the fury of rising flames. Michael plunged into deeper water as the passage ahead collapsed, swimming for the only direction left, out. He forced his way through a narrowing breach, lungs screaming for clean air. The ship groaned as if alive, wounded and dying, and a massive surge of bubbles propelled him upward into the vast black of open water. Above him, the sea glowed with blossoming fire beneath the surface, a hellish lantern lighting his path. The pressure of the explosion punched through the water, battering his body as he kicked with every last reserve of strength. The shockwave tore a scream from his chest that vanished into the abyss. But he broke the surface just as another explosion tore the wreck apart. Flames erupted into the night, spewing fragments skyward before the ocean swallowed them again. Michael gasped at the air, each breath ripping through him like glass. The burning wreck sank into silence, pulled down by the weight of ancient sins and modern greed. Pieces of wood and metal bobbed around him like the remains of some monstrous carcass. Far off, a distant alarm wailed from the coast. Lights flickered from patrol boats scrambling toward the scene. Michael paddled toward the shadows, not daring to be seen. Not yet. Not now. The cold water pressed into every bruise and cut he'd earned that day. His vision blurred at the edges, threatening to fail him entirely. But he kept moving. He had destroyed the heart of the cartel's secret operation, one branch severed, but countless others still reaching. He didn't know if the men who held him captive were alive or dead. He didn't know how long he had before word spread that an unknown saboteur had ignited their precious vault. He only knew he was not finished. He crawled onto the rocky edge of a secluded stretch of beach, collapsing against the sand, lungs wheezing. The moon watched from above, silent, impartial, uncaring. Michael pushed himself upright. Every muscle trembled in rebellion, but fire fueled his will. He rose to his feet and staggered toward home, each step a promise carved into the earth. Tomorrow, the world would learn what had happened beneath the water. Tomorrow, the cartel would begin to hunt the man who had turned their fortress into a tomb. And tomorrow, Michael would be ready, because the ocean had shown him its darkest secret, and he was still breathing. He looked back once at the glittering surface of the sea. Embers glowed faintly beneath the waves like the dying eyes of a beast dragged to the depths. The whispers of the deep were louder now, and he finally understood their message. This was only the beginning. The sea was quiet the morning after the explosion. Too quiet. The breeze that usually carried the scent of brine and seaweed now felt muted, as if nature itself were reluctant to disturb the calm after the violence beneath its surface. Michael stood barefoot at the shoreline, arms hanging loosely by his sides, feeling the gentle lap of the tide against his feet. To any passerby, he might have looked like just another local enjoying the early light. But inside him, a tempest still raged, pain, fear, and the grim satisfaction of having torn down a secret world that thrived beneath the waves. He had barely slept, his body screaming from bruises and burns and exhaustion. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the rumble of explosions again, felt the cold surge of the ocean swallowing burning fragments of the wreck. He saw faces. His fallen shipmates from years ago, the cartel men who tried to break him, the captain whose diary he had stolen from a coffin of salt and thyme. It was all tangled together now, impossible to separate in his mind. But the ache in his bones told him one thing clearly: he was still alive. He had survived where others had not. Coast Guard boats drifted near the remains of the underwater blast site. Divers in black suits plunged into the deep, searching the seabed for evidence, victims, and villains. News vans crowded the roads above the beach, their antennas pointed skyward as reporters scrambled to make sense of the chaos. The world had woken up to the truth that something monstrous lurked beneath the familiar face of this peaceful coast. Michael kept his distance from the chaos. He watched as emergency workers reported back to their commanders, carrying fragments of twisted metal and waterlogged crates. He overheard snippets of frantic conversation, mentions of a destroyed smuggling hub, references to international rings. He even caught the word cartel, muttered under the breath of a young officer, spoken with the reverence one might give to a dangerous god. It wasn't long before officials noticed him. His limp, the bandage wrapped hastily around his arm, the haunted look etched into his features. They made him stand out even when he tried to blend in. A Coast Guard lieutenant approached, a notepad tucked under his arm. "Sir," he said gently, "you were the one who signaled distress last night, correct? We found you half conscious up the beach." Michael nodded vaguely, offering the most believable version of the truth he could manage. He told them he had been out for a late swim, that he'd seen lights underwater, heard noises, and then an explosion. He'd been thrown by the shock wave, washed ashore by luck. It was a simple story, neatly packaged, and they accepted it because their attention was fixed on larger implications. But he could see the suspicion in their eyes. They wondered how one man could just happen to be near such devastation, while he had no clear explanation for his injuries, why the fear in his gaze seemed too deep to come from a single chaotic moment. Still, with no proof tying him to anything illegal, they had no reason to hold him. The lieutenant thanked him for his report, told him to get medical attention, and jogged off to continue the frantic search. Michael walked away before anyone else could stop him. He headed home with a stiff gait, each step sending fresh stabs of pain through his rib cage. The sun climbed higher, warming the world as if trying to burn away the horrors of the night. But the weight of what he had done followed him like a second shadow. Inside his modest home, silence greeted him. He stripped off the wetsuit and discarded the last traces of saltwater adrenaline that clung to his skin. In the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back, bandaged, bruised, and exhausted. But beneath the physical wreckage, he caught something unfamiliar in his own eyes. Defiance. For the first time in years, he felt a kind of clarity. He no longer viewed the ocean as his enemy. He no longer saw himself solely as a survivor of past trauma. He had faced his fear in the deepest darkness and come back with proof that he was stronger than the ghosts that chased him. Still, as he stared into his reflection, a different voice whispered in his mind, quiet but persistent. It wasn't enough. The map he'd taken from the captain's safe showed more than one marked location. The wreck he destroyed was only one point among several, and the captain's warning echoed in his memory. The true secret lies deeper. It wasn't treasure that concerned Michael now. Not gold, not money. Whatever the captain had hidden, whatever terrified him so much that he buried it at sea instead of delivering it to the crown, was still out there. And the cartel, even after the blow he had dealt them, would not give up. They would rebuild. They would search. And eventually, they would find the other marks on the map. Unless he found them first. His attention shifted to the wooden dining table where the leather-bound diary lay beside the ancient map. Even in the daylight, the red ink marks seemed to pulse with importance. He walked toward the table slowly, each step deliberate, as if approaching an altar. When he ran his fingers across the delicate parchment, he felt the pull of destiny, something he never believed in until now. A line of text caught his eye, one he hadn't noticed before, near the end of the diary's final entry. To protect the world from that which we have taken, I leave behind these marks. Only a man with courage greater than greed may seek them, and he will know that the ocean itself guards against his success. Michael stared hard at those words. They didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a challenge. His heart beat faster. For so long he had run from his past. He had been haunted by a single failure, convinced he was not strong enough to fight the sea again. But now the ocean called him not to relive a tragedy, but to correct a centuries-old wrong, to stop something his mind could barely imagine. He took a deep breath and closed the diary. The pain in his chest eased slightly, replaced by something sharp and purposeful. He crossed the room, grabbed his phone, and ordered new equipment. Stronger dive lights, improved tanks, deeper water gear. He spent money without hesitation, though he had very little, because now he knew where to find more. The gold he had hidden was still tucked away, and though he wanted no wealth from it, he would use what he must to continue the fight. As he confirmed the order, he heard footsteps outside. He froze. Every nerve in his body tensed. Slow, cautious steps moved up his porch. Then a knock. Firm. Official. Michael opened the door to find two police officers. Their expressions were grave, their uniforms crisp and polished. One of them pulled out a notepad, flipping it open. Mr. Jones, we just wanted to inform you that suspects connected to last night's incident have been identified. Multiple arrests have been made. We believe the explosion disrupted an international trafficking operation. Michael kept his face unreadable, though relief flickered inside him. The cartel's reach here, at least this branch, had been severed. The officer continued, "You have our gratitude. If you recall anything else, anything at all, you come to us." "You did good, sir, real good." Michael nodded. "Just glad I could help." The officers left, walking back toward their patrol car. The neighborhood would talk about this for years, how a quiet beach town became headline news overnight, how the authorities uncovered a criminal empire hiding under the waves, how a former sailor had somehow become part of it all. But none of them would know the full truth. Michael closed the door and exhaled slowly, leaning his back against the wood. Gratitude was a thin comfort when the horizon still held secrets and danger. He grabbed the map from the table and stepped outside again, limping slightly toward the beach. The sky had turned bright and cloudless, the kind of weather that built postcards and memories. Children laughed near the shore, unaware of the recent horror beneath their favorite waves. Life, as always, moved forward. Michael reached the dunes and surveyed the water. It glittered with innocence, disguising the monsters below. His gaze followed the invisible line from this shore to the coordinates marked on the map. Somewhere out there, buried deeper than before, rested the captain's true secret, and the cartel would eventually come looking for what he had destroyed. He wouldn't let them find the rest. He clenched the map tightly. His path was no longer behind him in the wreckage of the past. His future waited beneath the sea. As he turned to leave, the wind shifted, carrying the distant cry of gulls overhead. The ocean lapped at the sand with gentle insistence, whispering its eternal song. It no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a promise. Michael walked back up the beach, the map pressed close to his chest, the ghost of a smile touching his bruised lips. He had work to do. He had a mission again. He had a reason to breathe deeply, dive willingly, and fight relentlessly. The waves roared louder against the shore like applause from the deep. And he finally understood. He had not been running from the sea. He had been running toward it. The first chapter of his new life had begun. Before you go, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. We have even more unbelievable stories coming your way. Trust me, you don't want to miss them. And if this one shocked you, share it with a friend.